example, Rowan, say that you're scared of spiders, and every time you see a spider, I give you £10. It's not going to make you more scared of spiders, right? Because you can't.
Where I live in the country, it's going to make me extremely wealthy, Nick.
The Pet Health and Happiness podcast from Bella+Duke, keeping you at the cutting edge of pet nutrition, behaviour and health, with expert interviews, mythbusters and more to ensure your pet lives a long, happy, healthy life.
This week, I'm especially excited to introduce you all to Nick Benger, who is the expert dog trainer for Amazon Prime Video's The Pack. He's also the host of Dog Talk, a brilliant podcast, which I might have appeared on recently. And in his hometown of Bristol, Nick specialises in helping aggressive dogs. And he keeps getting rated as a top trainer, I think 4 years in a row now, which is no accident. And for those of you who are interested in pursuing him further, he's been in publications by the American Kennel Club, the Dodo Variety, and many, many more. Nick, welcome. We had an amazing conversation on your podcast. Welcome back to ours. As we said earlier off air, we were like two terriers exploring rabbit holes in the forest.
We've got many more to explore, I imagine. But now it's going to be training and behaviour rabbit holes instead.
Exactly. And this is such an important part. As much as nutrition is an important part of your dog's happiness and wellness, and that's really what we're focusing on, training and providing a structure is of paramount importance for lots of levels. But Nick, for those of you who have been living somewhere under a box and not heard of you, how would you describe your method of training?
Yeah, I think for me, I kind of had an epiphany early on when I started training dogs. I was doing everything in the kind of conventional way that we've all been taught. But what I was finding was, we were training dogs to do the kind of conventional things like come back, right? Just as an example, because this was really my entry point into kind of doing things a little bit differently. We would spend ages training dogs to come back. But what I would find is you train them to come back, but then they just instantly run off again, right? So this idea of training a recall wasn't really working for us. And eventually I got to exploring actually trying to solve the problem of the fact that the dog runs off in the first place. Because when you think about it, it's not really, when you have a dog that doesn't come back, it's not really that they don't come back, it's that they keep running off, right? So it's just kind of a perspective change. And we started focusing on trying to get dogs to engage with their people, and just from its absolute most basic form, which is just rewarding your dog for paying attention to you on a walk, up to playing games and doing all of this kind of stuff. And that had such a profound effect. Like I love reading, and I love reading self-development. And there's a book by Charles Duhigg called The Power of Habit, and he describes he describes what he calls keystone habits. You might be familiar with this, Rowan. So for example, like if you run every day, that tends to have a massive impact on your life beyond the running, because then you start maybe eating better. It has like a knock-on effect. And that's what I was finding with dogs with this engagement training, is it wasn't just having an effect on recall. People would come back and say their dog was lead walking better, or all kinds of benefits. They just kept saying how much more their dog was listening to them. And from there, we realized that it was really, really effective with dogs that were aggressive or reactive as well. And I started kind of delving more into that world as well. So now I actually mostly work with dogs that have aggression issues. But I kind of got my start, I guess, from this realization that we need to put more emphasis on actually engagement with the dog.
This is absolute gold. I am sitting here wrapped. It is so cool. And what I love is you're dealing with the cause, not simply addressing the symptom. And that for me is, this is what I love about nutrition, is that a lot of these symptoms that people originally come to you with, they don't need to be there. IBS and all of these things to go away. And you've really drilled down on the essence of it, which is you only need to call your dog back if it's a run off in the first place. And it's a simple paradigm shift, which really kind of, you go, oh, of course, you can't unsee that.
Well, like I said, I love reading, so I do make a lot of references. But Elon Musk has this. He encourages people to think about first principles, which is where you take a problem and you go back to the absolute most basic questions that come from that problem. And I think that it's the same with dog food as it is with dog training in this regard, where you kind of have this belief that people have had for so many years that nobody questions it. And like, for example, feeding dogs kibble or feeding them canned food or whatever. And in the dog world, well, we need to train a dog a recall because they keep running off. No one's really kind of sitting down and thinking, well, hang on a minute, is that really the problem here? And sometimes when I talk about this, people get the wrong impression that I'm saying that you shouldn't teach your dog a recall, and that's not the case. I still teach my dog a recall for when things go wrong, right? For example, I had a client whose dog, before they had a chance to teach their dog a recall, it ran out the front door, right, and got hit by a car. And thankfully, that dog lived. But even if you're not planning to let your dog off lead, it's a good idea to start doing the training with them, because you never know when maybe your lead breaks or something like that. You need to have a way of getting your dog back. And and kind of we're divoting here, but recall training is very, very simple. I think that sometimes it's overcomplicated by a lot of the stuff that you read online.
Well, and we've had a couple of these conversations now about the amount of information on the internet. Just prevalence of it does not necessarily mean that it's quality. And this comes back to a really key point that you've made, which is, and using your Elon Musk for first principles, is, well, quite often we're handed this information and it's repeated as if it's a truism. And as we were talking on your podcast, I mean, at what point did we ever think that it was going to be acceptable or healthy to feed your dog a flavored biscuit? Give a carnivore a flavored biscuit. It's tantamount to cruelty. And at what point do you, these training manuals, quite often, they're just repeating the same stuff without actually questioning it and looking to improve it. And it doesn't mean that what they were doing was wrong. It just means we can always get better, and there's room for growth and question and for us to evolve. And that's where it gets really exciting.
Yeah, well, when I started getting into engagement, I did some research on it, and I feel like the guy's name was Carl Spitz. That was the earliest reference that I found to someone saying that recall was the most important thing to train your dog. I can't remember the exact date of that now, but that was a long time ago. The guy trained Toto for The Wizard of Oz and some of the movie dogs back in the day. So he was kind of one of the first celebrity dog trainers. And below his quote that said, recall is the most important thing to train your dog, was his advice on how to train a recall. And the funny thing is almost exactly the same as what most people do today. So it really hasn't changed much at all. But one of the good things about the fact that people have thought that recall was so important is that I think we've got pretty good at training recalls, at least dog trainers have. A recall is a very easy thing to train your dog. But here's some kind of practical thing that you can do. So one of the things that we train dogs is an emergency whistle recall. So this is something that you're only going to use like when your dog runs out of the house, or they're running towards a road, or something has really gone wrong. And this is like the easiest dog training you'll ever do. Just get yourself a really loud whistle. I use a referee whistle because I just want something loud so the dog can hear it. Because of course, if they can't hear it, they can't respond to it. Presumably, if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably feeding your dog raw food, Bella+Duke, and more than likely they love their food, right? Because usually if you're feeding your dog raw food, they're eating it all in one and they're enjoying it. So that's great because we can take advantage of that. We can blow the whistle before we give the dog their food. And usually most people feed their dog twice a day, but whatever schedule you're on, right? Just blow the whistle every time you give your dog your food. You're making a massive association between the sound of the whistle and a huge reward. And then maybe you get one more repetition in the park, just blowing the whistle with your dog next to you and giving them a handful of treats. What you're doing there is the old Pavlovian conditioning, right? You're making the sound of the whistle equal a huge reward. No thought about distraction, how far the dog is away from you. Don't complicate it with that, just with the dog next to you. In about a month's time, after about a month of doing that, you just have a really, really phenomenal whistle recall, which serves then as your emergency for, like I said, if they're running towards a road or something like that. If you blow your whistle, you can be very confident that they'll come back.
This is absolute gold dust. I love it. Nick, thank you for sharing those talents. I'd not thought about that. I often think about, interventions in the dopamine state, but why over-engineer it?
Sure. Yeah.
Why over-engineer it? It works. It's effective.
Oh yeah, I mean that's just pure association. I mean, whenever we talk Rowan, there is the temptation to get geeky. Right?
I hope you're not pointing any fingers at me. I'm really cool. I'm not remotely geeky.
the reason that is
neural programming. Let's explore that.
But the reason that is so effective is because of the reward history. And I actually interviewed a neuroscientist on my podcast.
Yeah.
And I asked her about this, and I was trying to I was asking her, why is this so effective? And she was saying, because there's so much reward history, you've made that kind of connection in the brain so strong through repetition. And the brain essentially takes the easiest route, right? Yeah. And when you've done that so many times, even if what they're recalling from is more rewarding, because you built up so much reward history, it can be really effective. So for example, I was out walking with a client and their dog, and we're walking along and the dog suddenly bolted under a fence. And then we realized that there were sheep in the field and we hadn't seen them. She blew her whistle and the dog came straight back. And that was because she had been putting in lots and lots of repetition with a whistle. Now, it's not that the treats that she was giving the dog were more rewarding than chasing the sheep, because there's not really anything you can give the dog that's going to be more rewarding than that experience. But it's because she'd built up so much reward history with the whistle that it was so effective.
Well, this is awesome, because actually neural programming is sort of one of my little geeky sidelines, and I'm really interested in it. And apparently the first time you do it, it's like walking across a wet field. You leave a little trail between 2 points in the brain. You connect A with B. And the more you do that, exactly as you're saying, the more you reinforce it to the point where, and we know that electricity goes between the two shortest points, you've created a super highway between whistle, reward.
Yes.
And that's going to be the fastest. And this is, I guess, where this is going to be the fastest connection between those two dots. The dog's going to stop in its tracks, say, hey, wow, you've tapped into my reward center. I'm coming back to base. Now, I guess in some respects, just moving slightly along the same journey is, I guess this is why some dogs are very aggressive, because they're used to associating people with fear or being beaten or whichever, and their neural network needs reprogramming. Is that much the case, Nick?
Yeah. So, I mean, you're right on the theory, it is exactly the same. And then you can extrapolate that and say, well, that applies to any behavior. Any behavior that is reinforced a lot is going to become stronger, more difficult to, in behavior, we use the word extinguish, which is, will break down that connection. And you're right. So talking about aggressive dogs, if we're talking about a fear aggressive dog, usually the reaction, the reward for the reaction is that the thing that they're scared of moves away. Right. So, if say that you see a dog and is lunging at you and barking and showing teeth, a pretty ordinary reaction to that is to get out of the way, right? Which is extremely rewarding if you're scared and you're trying to scare the dog away.
I see it's a win-win for both parties, Nick.
Exactly, right. But then you're right. That aggressive behavior does become rewarded from that. So usually if we're dealing with aggressive dogs, there are lots of different ways you can do it, but what we try to do is, again, I'm getting a little bit geeky, but we call it differential reinforcement, right? We're rewarding something different to the behavior we don't like.
Okay.
Right? So in that case, so one common example of this is the dog sees, say that we've got a dog that's aggressive towards people, for example. the dog sees a person at the distance at which they're not reacting, right?
Okay.
And then what we start to do is reward a behavior that we prefer. And for most people, that's going to be paying attention to you. That's very convenient behavior, right? So the dog's staring at the thing that they're worried about. As soon as they look back at you, you reward them. And what we're working towards is that when they see the trigger, a person, they pay attention to you instead. And then we can gradually bring that person closer. And we're replacing this aggressive response with a new response. When you see someone, pay attention to me. So if you want to call that reprogramming, you can. But at the same time, what's happening is you're actually forming a positive association, which gets the dog over the fear, right? Because you have an emotional response there. It's not just behavior. It's actually an emotional response. So in order to get the dog over the fear, what we need to do is start creating positive associations with the thing that they're scared of.
Yeah.
There's a really amazing video that I show almost everyone that shows you this process in a couple of minutes. If you search for Sophia Yin counter conditioning on YouTube, there's a brilliant video of a Jack Russell where she shows you this whole process, which I'd recommend checking out. Yeah, I love that because it's a really visual demonstration of it. Because one question that a lot of people have is, well, if I reward my dog, in this situation in which they can become aggressive, aren't they going to be more aggressive because aren't they rewarding that aggression? And actually, you can't reward an emotion. So, for example, Rowan, say that you're scared of spiders, and every time you see a spider, I give you £10. It's not going to make you more scared of spiders, right? Because you can't.
Where I live in the country, it's going to make me extremely wealthy, Nick. I'm going to be known as the Spider-Man of gold.
I might run out of money as well, but eventually what happens is you'll actually get excited when you see a spider, because you will know that means that you're going to get rewarded.
Okay.
Or get something you like. And eventually it moves beyond the fact that there's a reward there. I mean, for dogs, being social is quite inherently rewarding once you've broken down the fear anyway. So it's not like you're going to be rewarding your dog for the rest of their life once you've got them over that emotion.
Yeah. Oh, this is really, really intriguing. I'm actually trying to dial myself back and not ask too many questions. But Nick, what would you say has been the number one cause of, shall we say, deep-seated aggression that you found in dogs today? Because you've been doing this forever, haven't you? You've really kind of turned your passion into a purposeful career. It's not like a job you selected. This is just you being you.
Oh, definitely. My first one-to-one session with anyone was when I was 15 years old, because they saw me down the field and could see that I was just obsessed with dog training. And they were like, can you come and help us?
Brilliant. That's an advert in itself, isn't it? When you have adults asking for help because they can see that mind you, I suppose my dad used to ask my sisters to program the video, but that's a different thing.
Yeah, but to answer your question, though, the most common reason is socialization, either lack of socialization, which is a massive issue right now because of lockdown. People aren't able to socialize a dog as they normally would, or socialization gone wrong. And that's what happened to me, actually, when I was starting out with my first puppy. I did really try to socialize him because I knew that, it's one thing that everyone says, you have to socialize your puppy. But what the mistake I made was I didn't differentiate between bad experiences and good experiences. And I don't feel like that point is really made very much. Socialization is not equal. If you're being, say, for example, this is what happened 100%. With me. I got a Labrador puppy. I knew I had to socialize him, so I got him around loads of dogs. The problem was I got him around a lot of dogs that weren't very nice to him. Right. Yep. So he actually was accumulating bad experiences. And then once he kind of got a little bit older, got a little bit testosterone, that initial fear turned into aggression to try and make these dogs go away. So when you're actually socializing, you need to be thinking about, is my dog having a positive experience? Is this moving us further along with their socialization, or is it actually moving us backwards and more making the dog more nervous? And back in the day, well, I say back in the day, but really not that long ago, you used to go to puppy class, and when you'd have a nervous puppy that would hide under the chair, people would drag them out and force them to socialize. Of course, what you're doing there is you're making the dog have a bad time. Some times you get nervous dogs and you have to go slower with them to build up those positive experiences instead of just forcing them into the situation.
This is so exciting to hear, and it's so simple. It's much like when we've had other conversations, you just go, oh, wow, of course, penny drops, gavel down, drop the mic, and all beautifully articulated, Nick. I think this is really relevant right now because puppy ownership is obviously going off the charts for various reasons, which we don't need to cover. But it's going off the charts. I think our number one range at the moment is puppy food. So kudos to all those people who are out there who are interested in their puppy's health and investing in creating health for the future. But this is key. I think, Nick, we almost need to do a separate podcast on socializing your puppy and top takeaways that people can do. We could be creating an entirely happier generation of dogs and dog owners.
Well, this is what we're trying to do, Rome, with our classes. You know, we're really trying to scale up our classes so we can actually guide people through this whole process. But there are actually two issues right now which are really common, you know, so lack of socialization because people aren't able to socialize their dogs. Although one tip on that actually is garden centers right now are a really good place to socialize your dog. You know, because you can actually go to the garden center and there's usually lots of people there and it's a good experience. So anyway, I digress.
That's a good tip though.
The other one that is really common is separation anxiety because people are staying at home all day. And they're not necessarily thinking about the fact that eventually they're going to have to go back to work, or they're going to have to leave their dog in some way to either go to the shops or whatever. So that's one thing that people with puppies really need to be thinking about. Is the kind of skyrocket in separation anxiety cases that we're seeing is unbelievable. It's gone from not seeing separation anxiety that often to getting so many phone calls about puppies, starting to develop separation anxiety. And dealing with separation anxiety is very avoidable as an issue. Much like socialization, it's really just a case of getting your dog used to being left. And I think sometimes people think you have to start by leaving your dog for half an hour, and that's really not the case. You can start by just closing the door and walking straight back in again, build up from leaving them for seconds to a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Because sometimes people say, hey, my puppy gets nervous straight away, right? And so the answer is walk out the room and walk straight back in again and build up from there. Much like if you're teaching your dog to stay, you don't start with 10 minutes, right? You start with a couple of seconds and then you build up.
Yeah, once again, I feel like you're shining a torch into a dark place there. We've got a fabulous behaviourist who works with us called Caroline Spencer, who asked me to say hello, by the way. Oh, she's a big fan and she's been referring aggression cases to you.
Oh, that's awesome.
I've got to confess here that whilst I have an incredibly happy, healthy, well-fed dog, she is a Velcro dog. So your top tips for me would be to continue leaving her on regular play rather than letting her pursue me around the house.
Yeah, this is an issue for a lot of people, Rowan. So oftentimes we think of separation anxiety as only being when you actually leave the house. But some dogs can get really anxious when they're not able to be in the same room with you, which, can get ridiculous when you can't even go to the toilet without having your dog in the room with you.
Oh, do you mean that she's not meant to be there as moral support? Staring at you like, just let me know if you need any help.
So, absolutely, building up that kind of independence, the ability to be in another room without becoming anxious, I think is a really important skill.
Yeah.
At the same time, I have a little Chihuahua mix that is a companion. There's a companion breed, right? And so being near people is extremely rewarding. And he would, he loves to follow us around. But at the same time, we've built up that ability to be in another room and be alone. For example, now as I'm talking to you, he's in the kitchen, he's chilling out. So you need to have, your dog needs to have the ability to do that. That's what's really important.
Yeah, I guess that's lessons for life. We all need to be comfortable being alone.
Definitely.
It's funny because Kismet has definitely developed this since we've been around the house a lot more and working from home. And in fact, my partner said only the other day, she goes, it's getting a little bit uncomfortable the way she just stares at me in the shower.
Well, that's a good point though, Rowan. A lot of people are going to be noticing that, and trying to prepare for going back to work is going to be a big task for a lot of people, because your dog's going to be in for a real shock if you go from not going out at all to going out for large portions of the day.
So 100%.
Trying to build that up is really important. Definitely.
Right, so you've heard it here, everyone. As per Nick, our superstar dog behaviourist, please start now building it up with your dog to avoid any kind of seismic ruptures, shifts, power changes, or surprises. You'll thank Nick, your dog, and everyone else later. I think that's a really good point, Nick. We often, as humans, we talk about the impact that lockdown has had on us, and we don't always think about our pets.
Yeah. When we have seen more of that, I think a lot of people have way more aware of their dog's issues, as well, because, for example, like one common one at the moment is the dog maybe getting a little bit aggressive or frustrated with the children, right? The dog's used to children being out for the majority of the day and having that ability to rest and sleep and chill out. And now they're with the children constantly throughout the day, and maybe that issue is kind of magnified. But that's just one example. There's plenty of situations where, actually, Rowan, I'm sure you're probably aware of this, but sleep in dogs is massively underrated as important part of health and well-being, and one really common issue we see with puppies all the time is that they don't get enough sleep, because puppies really should be sleeping 16 to 20 hours a day. And everyone, when they get a puppy, they're super excited. They want to play with the puppy all day. Everyone has people come round, which is good from a socialization perspective. But we have to be aware of the fact that the puppy does need to sleep a lot. And when they don't sleep, we start seeing a massive increase in problem behaviors. They start becoming far more bitey. They can seem hyperactive, and people can start getting in this loop where the dog seems hyperactive, so they exercise the dog more. And actually, that's the worst thing they could do, because the dog actually just needs rest, right? But they kind of they mistakenly think that the dog needs more exercise when it might actually just need more rest.
I am so glad you've actually grasped that thorny thistle, because Caroline's talked about this a lot. And it's one of these, truisms that we discussed before that get repeated, like, oh, you just need to wear it out. Please don't do that. Invest in your dog's calm, peace, quiet. It needs loads of energy for growing, rather than having in a tired and wired situation where it's constantly being picked up, socialized perhaps in the wrong situations, exposed to too much. Needs some peace and quiet just so it can grow those nice healthy neural networks. We've seen exactly that in our group. And even the way you are with your dog, there's time for you to let loose. But if you've got kids in the house and they're not letting the dog sleep and it's constantly being, that's actually quite an assault on its senses. It can be really overwhelming. And
definitely. I mean, the same thing happens when people have an older dog and they get a younger puppy.
Yeah.
And they kind of expect the older dog to put up with the younger puppy 24 hours a day. And actually, it's really important that the older dog gets a chance to just go and chill out and isn't dealing with a puppy all the time. And if you don't provide that, then oftentimes what happens is then you start seeing the older dog get really frustrated and actually start to act more aggressively towards a puppy, because it's just so fed up of being, having his head jumped on by a little puppy. And it's not the puppy's fault. It's not the puppy's fault. They're just being a puppy, right? But you just need to be aware of these things and try to, provide opportunities for your dogs to have that rest.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. We often overlook that. Our excitement sometimes comes first. But realistically, you're investing in your dog of the future. So be careful of the whirlwind you create. If
Yeah,
you're constantly antagonizing your dog or exciting it, it's just not a healthy state to be in.
One of the things you said, Rowan, which kind of like gave me a little light bulb, you're talking about kind of bad socialization. And in the dog training world, it almost got a little bit trendy at one point to say that you don't socialize your dog as kind of like a badge of honor. And really what people were getting at was this difference between bad socialization and good socialization. So when people were saying, I don't socialize my dog, what they mean is they're not allowing their dog to just rack up all these bad experiences. Or one issue that a lot of people have is they try to socialize their dogs by letting them play with other dogs constantly, which sounds nice, but then when your dog gets to a year old, and they start having this massive expectation of every time you go to the park is seen as an opportunity to just play with dogs constantly, which isn't very good when you're standing across the field and your dog's shooting off to go and find a dog, on the opposite side of the park. So sometimes people can build bad or unhelpful expectations in their dogs by allowing them to just play with every single dog that they see. So an important part of socialization is also being able to watch dogs, from afar and be perfectly relaxed by that and not have this expectation of being able to play with every single dog. There's many dogs out there that are reactive or aggressive, and people are trying to stay away from other dogs, and they're not going to appreciate it when your dog barrels over from across the field in an attempt to play.
Yeah, and I've got a million comedy movie reels scrolling in my mind now of beach encounters where an excitable water dog puppy has gone over to introduce herself and somebody's going, stay away. And their dog's actually quite aggressive or quite threatened. And normally, I must confess, my dog's very good at picking up on that and saying, okay, fine, be like that. I'm off.
Yeah. Well, one thing, Rowan, actually, we are really trying to educate people on in our classes is the yellow dog scheme, which a lot of people haven't heard of. Well, the yellow dog scheme is basically if you see a dog wearing yellow, any yellow at all, yellow bandana, yellow lead, yellow harness, then that is a kind of indication that that person or that dog needs space. Right. So that could be for any reason. That could be that they're aggressive. That could be that maybe they just don't appreciate dogs or people, greeting dogs or people. Maybe they have some kind of disease, any reason. Right. But when you see a dog wearing yellow, that's an indication that they need space. And there's a project called the Yellow Dog Project, which is trying to popularize this so that we can kind of better manage walks, and people that do need that space can get it without having to shout or just generally have a bit of a nightmare of their walks.
This is fabulous. I absolutely love it. I will do what I can to help you promote it. We'll put it in our Facebook group, which is now over 20,000 people. So we'll ensure that we spread the word. And we might even get you on to do a Facebook Live, Nick, and talk about that with Caroline, our behaviourist. I think if we can get that out to 20,000 people in the Facebook group and put it on the Facebook page, this could literally go viral in the most positive of ways. And you've got a captive audience pretty much there. So
that'd be incredible. Yeah, that'd be incredible because, we were talking before we started recording about like our role is to kind of to educate people. And I think that it's really important for these kind of, I hear because I work with aggressive dogs, I hear so many people complaining about people just letting their dogs run up to them and the chaos that kind of happens when it happens. So I think these kind of schemes are really, really important. And I don't want to mislead anyone. That's not my project. It's not something I've created. It's just something I'm passionate about because I see the fallout of it.
Yeah, and this is it. If dogs have been traumatized by encounters, I noticed a huge difference in my dog when she'd been attacked by a very, very big aggressive male dog, which just turned us. Now she's very intimidated by similar coloured, similar sized dogs, whereas she never was. And people are often they're so relaxed. They just let their dog come straight up to her. She's 15 kilos, and suddenly you've got a 60-kilo dog with its. It's intimidating.
Definitely.
You wouldn't do that with your children. Yeah. You wouldn't let some kind of giant beery rugby player just come up and prod your child in the face. If so, you'd be an errant parent. Yes, that is judgy for any errant parents out there listening.
I'm so glad you said that, Rowan, actually, because a lot of people don't think about that. And sometimes you get this divide where it's like big dog owners versus small dog owners. And as someone that actually has had and loves both, I love big dogs, I love small dogs. I can see both sides of that equation. And one thing that a lot of people don't consider about small dogs is that size difference is ginormous. And understandably, they're going to be very easily intimidated. And sometimes they can get a bad reputation for that. And people will say things like, oh, small dogs are snappy and all of this kind of stuff. Remember what we were talking about earlier, where aggression is very often a strategy to get space, to get the other dog or person to give you space. And when you're small and you have a massive dog running over to you, it makes a lot of sense from a behavioral perspective to use aggression to try to get that dog not to leap on top of you, right? Because as many
to get dogs stepped on. I've seen dogs get literally run over. There was a Great Dane on the beach running around the other day. Beautiful dog, fabulous dog, zero criticism of that. Running around, and there's a Chihuahua running around next to it. It just got absolutely trampled. Now, you wouldn't let that happen at, say, for instance, a child's school, to go back to that analogy. You wouldn't have a 15-kilo child playing rugby with a 200-kilo, and that's pretty much the differential.
Definitely. It really
is. It's just dangerous.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. So, for the big dog owners, and I'm one of them, we just have to be a little bit more aware of that, and we have to make sure that we can control our dog in a way that if we see that Chihuahua running around on the beach, we can call our dog back and make sure that they don't well-meaningly, because they're always well-meaning, they want to play,
of course,
but they're dogs and they have brains like toddlers, right? So they see another dog, and they don't really think about the fact that size difference and how easy it is for them to accidentally hurt a small dog.
And at this point, this is when you bring out your whistle, for those of you who've been listening from the beginning. So start doing your homework now, whistle, and leaving your dog, closing the doors and popping back in. Everybody's going to have a better life.
Yeah, well said, Ron.
Yeah, indeed. Well, Nick, I think we've covered quite a few really great topics here. I've learned loads and I've really enjoyed it. Ostensibly, I was going to pick your brains about what you've seen in behaviour changes on food, but I think we're going to save that and puppy socializations and the yellow dog scheme for another exciting episode and another great adventure.
Yeah, I would love that, Rowan. That'd be awesome.
Nick, thank you so much for everything you do. We went around and we did some homework, and seeing the accolades for everything you're doing, you're really changing dogs and their owners' lives. Frankly, that's just a big slice of kudos from me and from Bella+Duke. So thank you. And thanks for your time, because I appreciate you're super busy. You're on a mission. And if there's anything we can ever do to support you on it, please always ask us. We're up for it.
Well, thank you, Rowan. Honestly, I so appreciate it. It's been great, since we've connected. It's been awesome being able to talk, and I think we both have the same mission at heart, which is just trying to make dogs' lives better, right? And even though we're coming at that, you're coming at it from like a nutrition standpoint, and I'm coming at it from a behavior standpoint. But I think it's so good that we get that opportunity to collaborate. It's great.
Yeah, fantastic. Nick, thank you so much, and I'm looking forward already to our next episode.
Thanks, Rowan.